Now, when you go for a custom fitting, a lot of time is spent focused on getting the right shaft length and weight and flex and the right lie angle, but you could argue that the most important thing, and that is getting the right type of club in your bag in every position, is often glossed over or completely overlooked. So with help from stats from our data partners at ShotScope, I'm going to help build the optimum set of golf clubs by handicap from scratch golfer all the way up to 25 handicapper, so you can build the right clubs for your game and hopefully see your scores come down. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, if you're a scratch golfer, you're probably pretty set with the clubs that are currently in your bag. They're probably working quite well. You don't need me to tell you what to change. But one club that's becoming a lot more popular out on tour and could be an option to consider is the mini driver. And I've got one here. This is the TaylorMade burner mini driver, the copper version. And this is a club that's becoming, as I said, increasingly popular on tour because it just gives you a little bit more potential for accuracy off the tee, and also something that's going to give you an option off the deck if you want a little bit more distance out of that club below your driver. So we know a mini driver, it's spec'd sort of in between a driver and a 3-wood, so the shaft length is sort of directly in between that, and the head size as well is also directly pretty much in between a driver and a 3-wood. So it's going to give you a little bit more ball speed and forgiveness than the 3-wood, and because the shaft is shorter, it's going to give you a little bit more control, hopefully, than a traditional length driver. And the reason that's important is because you look at PGA Tour average accuracy off the tee, it's around 59%, and with a scratch golfer that drops to 50%. There's a relatively big gulf there. When you also consider from 100 to 150 yards, you're more likely to find the green from the fairway than you are on the rough, and if you go into a fairway bunker, that greens in regulation percentage drops right down to 26%. So while distance is obviously very important, accuracy is also something to consider, and a mini driver could well give you a nice option if the driver's misbehaving, you struggle with driver generally, and you tend to use a 3-wood but want something that's going to give you a little more distance. A mini driver could be the way to go, and it's just going to give you that option if you like to play long shots off the deck. You can adjust the loft on these. This one's set to 11.5, can go all the way up to 13 if you want to play something off the deck a bit more. But I'm going to give this mini driver a go, and hopefully with the shorter shaft it should give me a little bit more control than a normal driver, and could be an option if you're a scratch golfer looking to find more fairways. Just like that. Right, so now we move up to a 5 handicap golfer, and this is where it gets really interesting because there's some key decisions to be made, especially at the top end of the bag. Now, typically when we get to a 5 handicapper, you will see 2-iron and 3-irons going out, and the iron set starting at the 4-iron. But also you're going to see hybrids start to be added in here, especially a 3 hybrid, because if you look at the ShotScope data, it tells you that every ability of golfer is more accurate and hits more greens with a hybrid than they do a long iron equivalent. So you definitely want to start considering adding at least 1 hybrid to your bag, but you will see most 5 handicap golfers keeping the 4-iron in the bag because they have the speed and the competency of strike to be able to get the required carry distance, and also gives you a bit of an option if you want to flight the ball down, which a lot of low handicappers do. So definitely think about adding a hybrid in replace of those 3-irons. But the other decision, or a club you should absolutely consider, is a 5-wood instead of a 3 hybrid. It gets really interesting here because if you look at the ShotScope data, it tells you that 5-woods give especially low handicap golfers, more higher skill golfers, a distinct distance advantage over a 3 hybrid. It's actually about 20 yards longer on average than a 3 hybrid. So if you're looking for something that's going to give you more distance at that top end of the bag, a 5-wood is absolutely worth considering. And don't forget, it has a slightly larger footprint than the hybrid, so potentially could be a little bit more forgiving and stable for you as well. Obviously, we know in that position of the bag, it's not all about distance. You have to make sure you get the gapping correct. And for some, maybe a 5-wood might go too far, and therefore you might want to think about adding a 5-wood instead of a 3-wood potentially if you struggle with a 3-wood. But a 5-wood definitely has a lot of advantages for lower handicap golfers, and to be honest with you, I haven't actually tried a 5-wood before, so as a 3 handicapper myself, I'm keen to experience what they're like. So we've got a flag down there around 230, which should be a pretty good club for this particular shot. Oh, that felt nice. Oh wow, it's drawing just right at the pin, all good for distance. Back of the green, I'll absolutely take that. I mean, that felt fast, a lot faster than my hybrid. So if you're looking for a more distance orientated choice in that particular section of the bag and you're a 5 handicapper, a 5 wood could be the way to go. Right, so now we're moving on to a 10 handicapper, and I think there's a couple of really key decisions that 10 handicappers need to make when it comes to the clubs in the sort of middle to top area of the bag. And the first would be the point at which your hybrids or your metal woods transition into irons. There's obviously a few different options you can go down, whether it's high lofted woods or hybrids, but I think definitely consider adding an extra hybrid into your bag instead of a long iron. So rather than going from your hybrids into a 4 iron, maybe swapping out the 4 iron and going for a 4 hybrid, because the shot scope data tells us that golfers are far more accurate and consistent with a 4 hybrid compared to the 4 iron equivalent. And I've done a lot of head-to-head testing with a 4 and a 4 hybrid up against each other, and there's no doubt the 4 iron performance is okay, but when you don't quite strike it, and let's face it, 10 handicappers are a little bit inconsistent with the strike, you see those big drop-offs in distance and carry, which is going to have a real impact on your scoring abilities. So putting a 4 hybrid in the bag instead of a 4 iron is definitely one thing I would consider for 10 handicappers. And the other thing I would definitely look at is adding a combination set to your bag. So otherwise known as a combo set, which refers to having 2 types of iron built within the same set. So you might have, for example, cavity back irons in the longer irons. That's going to give you a little bit more launch, a little bit more forgiveness, and then transition maybe in the 6 iron or the 7 iron into slightly more compact, more feel orientated clubs that are going to give you a little bit more distance control. But Titleist is a good example of a brand that has a wide range of irons. I use the T150s, but if you're a 10 handicapper, you could easily transition into the T200 model, into the 5 and maybe 6 iron, just to give you a little bit more consistency in that area of the bag on those longer iron shots that, let's face it, are a little bit more difficult to hit. But just going back to the 4 hybrid, this is a club that I've actually grown to love over the last few months, and I'm not a 10 handicap golfer, but I'm certainly considering putting one in the bag instead of my 4 iron because of how easy it feels like it is to hit. Got just shy of 200 yards to the middle of the green, which is a pretty good number for this 4 hybrid club. So let's see if we can hit the green. Oh, it's just leaking a little bit. Might just catch a piece. Yeah, just on that front right corner. Pretty happy with that. So yeah, some key decisions to be made. Combo sets, 4 hybrids, definitely 2 things for 10 handicappers to consider. And now we move on to a 15 handicap golfer, and I think there's 2 key considerations when it comes to certain clubs in certain areas of the bag that you definitely want to think about. The first being the inclusion of a 4 iron. If you look at the shot scope data, you can see there's a big drop off from where a 10 handicapper hits a 4 iron in terms of total distance versus where a 15 handicapper hits a 4 iron. So clearly there's some issues with strike there. Getting the appropriate distance out of a club that's got so little loft is obviously a bit of an issue, so potentially look at swapping in a hybrid in place of a 4 iron to give you a little bit more speed, distance, and making sure there's not that distance bunching at that end of the bag, and spread out those gaps a bit more to cover off the different distances. The other thing the data probably tells a 15 handicapper they should consider is a draw bias driver. If we look at where 15 handicappers tend to miss their tee shots, 23% is left and 26% is right. So to try and reverse the numbers more in their favour, a draw bias driver may well be a good option. This is one example I've got here. It's the Ping G440 SFT model. There's obviously all the major manufacturers offer draw bias drivers, but this is probably one that's going to give you draw bias as well as a good level of forgiveness as well from Ping. So definitely worth a try. And if you do add a little bit more draw bias to your tee shots, you should hopefully also increase a little bit more distance. So if you look at the shot scope data, you'll see that a 15 handicapper is 23 yards shorter off the tee with driver than a 10 handicapper. So that's a big golfing distance, and if you're putting a draw bias driver in the bag, you could well kill 2 birds with 1 stone. A little bit more accuracy, reducing that right miss, and a little bit more distance as well. It's going to hopefully knock some shots off your scores. Right, now we're moving on to a 20 handicap golfer, and if you are a 20 handicap golfer, it obviously makes sense to choose a bag of clubs that focus on creating more distance and forgiveness over things like feel and creativity and workability and that sort of thing. So obviously your iron set is going to be built more for forgiveness. It's going to be a cavity back style design, I would hope, maybe some offset on there as well to fight a slice. And I think in this particular part of the bag, at the top end of the bag, you could actually start to add clubs and build a bigger variety of clubs to give you more distance, and maybe sacrifice some clubs in the short game, so maybe taking out a wedge and adding something at the top of the bag that's going to give you more options from different distances. So probably, starting with a driver, you might want to think about having a slightly higher lofted driver, but also packing in some higher lofted woods. We've already talked about the benefits of a 5 wood over an equivalent hybrid, but also don't forget you can go even more lofted with a fairway wood. So for example, you get 7 woods, and I've got here a Ping G430 9 wood, so last year's model, but a 9 wood, we've seen it even popular out on tour, but it's not just a club reserved for the very best players. I think a 9 wood is a really good option for golfers that struggle to get the ball up in the air from the ground, struggle with long irons. It's going to give you a lot of forgiveness, a lot of launch, a lot of assistance, and you can build out a set depending on how you want to. You could add lots of different clubs in there, 5 wood, 7 wood, 9 wood, and start your iron set a lot later than a low handicapper would. So, I start my iron set at a 4 iron, but you could potentially start your iron set at a 6 iron to allow you to pack in more woods and give you a little bit more forgiveness. Because don't forget, if you're sacrificing a wedge to make way for these woods, I think that's a sacrifice worth making, because you're not necessarily going to have that creativity and versatility around the greens. Your short game is going to be probably a little bit more one-dimensional. As your skill level starts to improve, then you can start to add more wedges, add a bit of creativity and versatility around the greens with some additional lofts and grinds and that sort of thing. But a 9 wood is definitely a club worth trying if you are a 20 handicapper. I am not a 20 handicapper, but I've never hit a 9 wood before, and I'm very curious to know what it's like. I imagine it's going to go up my left nostril, but we can have a go with it. Let's try and get a good lie here. We're up the beautiful Stoke Park. Lovely hole here, about 220 yards away. There's an incredible amount of loft on show. It looks very easy to hit. I think a lot of 20 handicap golfers were very intimidated by what a 3 wood looks like down behind the ball. But the opposite is true with a 9 wood. There's a lot of loft there that just looks like you're going to get the ball up in the air really easily, which is the opposite of what a 3 wood looks like. So let's see if that manifests itself here. But it's gone very high, a little bit left, and it's hit the tree, unfortunately. But you can see the height I got from that instantly. It was really interesting to experiment, to try. And I think a lot of 20 handicap golfers would definitely recommend trying something like a 7 wood or a 9 wood. It's going to give you a little bit more playability from the turf when you're hitting from distance. Right, if you're a 25 handicapper, obviously you're going to have clubs in your bag designed for maximum help, maximum forgiveness. You might even have a package set, which is a really good starting point. If you want to keep the cost down, it's going to give you a decent amount of clubs and a bag that's going to get you around the course. But one area, the stats and the data tells us that high handicappers, like a 25 handicapper, can make real inroads on their scores and get the handicap down is in the short game. When you consider they're only getting up and down generally 1 in 4 times, so 25%. And when you consider a 15 handicapper is getting up and down 1 in 3 times, clearly there's progress to be made in the short game. And in particular, the sand, as you can see, I'm in a bunker here. 25 handicappers only get up and down 10% of the time, so 1 in 10, which is not a lot at all. Obviously, some of that comes down to the ability at the other end to get the ball in the hole on the green, but I think a lot of high handicappers struggle to get the ball out of the bunker first time, struggle to get a good strike, and struggle to get the ball a good appropriate distance. So one way you could absolutely do that is by adding a bunker specific club. Now I've got the Ping Bunker here, the new club from Ping. Gonna throw my specialist lob wedge out the way and have a go with this Ping Bunker. If you're a 25 handicap golfer, you really struggle in the sand. If it's a real card wrecker for you, something that's bunker specific could well be an option to try. You can chip with it around the green if you want to, but it is designed mainly for bunkers. Super wide sole, loads of bounce, lots of loft. Let's see if it can help me get the ball out of the sand a bit more easily here. Nice smooth swing, popped it out nicely. A little bit too hard, but that felt surprisingly easy. Got through the sand really quickly, exited really fast, and could well be a good option if you're a 25 handicapper looking to lower your handicap. So hopefully you found this video useful. Do let me know in the comments if there's a club that's really worked for you that I haven't mentioned. I'd love to hear from you. Do click the like button if you like what you're watching, and if you're interested in starting your own journey with ShotScope and their distance measuring device products and performance tracking, I've put some handy links in the description down below where you can get your hands on those. But that's all from me here from the beautiful Stoke Park. I'll see you next time.